First thing we want to check on this car is the tire pressure and the tire tread wear. So let's do tire pressure first. This is a digital gauge, and I recommend these digital gauges. They're more accurate. So let's see what this one's at. This one's measuring 30.5 psi. Then the next thing you want to check is your tire tread depth. This one is in 30 seconds, and it's approximately 10-30 seconds. So this tire is fine. I had mentioned in the PowerPoint about using a penny, and if you look at this penny in here, if you were to see the top of Lincoln's head upside down, that tire's about worn out. But this tire, you can barely see his mouth, so there's plenty of tread left on this tire. The tire pressure placard is usually on the B pillar. That will give you the recommended pressure.
So after checking your tires for tread wear and tire pressure and comparing to the placard on the door, next we're going to move up to the engine compartment, and we're going to check oil and fluid levels. And so we're going to have Bob here show us those things.
Engine oil. So let's see if this is up on the dipstick. So usually it's near the valve cover. This is your dipstick right here. Should be fully seated. This vehicle's been sitting for a while, so this should be a good check. You always want to do this check on a cooler engine if you can. So we're going to wipe it off first, make sure it's dry, and then we're going to reinsert it. And we're fine. There's two dots here. This would be on the low end, that dot. This would be on the high end. We're in between, so this vehicle's fine on oil. If you were probably about halfway, you're probably down about close to a quart. Half a quart to a quart. All right, the next check you want to think about, especially if your temp gauge has been rising on your car, is just to check the coolant level. Now, this car has a traditional radiator cap, but you always want to do this check on a cool engine. You don't want to take this cap off on a hot engine, or that coolant will come shooting out of there and scald you. So this engine's cooled down, so we're going to take the cap off, and if we look in there, the coolant's right up to here. Now, if it was low, I would want to add coolant into the radiator right here. Usually it's a 50-50 mixture, and you always want to check with your automotive parts house to make sure you use the correct coolant. Because if you use the wrong coolant on some of these cars today, you'll actually start destroying gaskets inside the engine. And the more traditional way that it's done now in the newer cars, they're not going to allow you access to the radiator. They're going to have a coolant recovery bottle. I call it a degas bottle. And you can actually check this. There's always a line, a plastic line. And this should actually be between the two arrows. It should be between this arrow and this arrow. This one is a hair low, probably about 8-10 ounces low, so it needs a little more coolant. This style here, I would also wait, because this is pressurized. This is actually your radiator cap down. Wait till the vehicle cools down, and you would add the coolant right here into that reservoir. Most vehicles today are going to have one serpentine belt. And what I do is sometimes you can twist them a little bit and look to see if there's any cracks or pieces missing. Minor cracks I wouldn't worry about, tiny little cracks. But if you have strips of this ribbing falling out, it's time to replace that belt. And the other thing that you want to look at is the condition of your radiator hoses. This is your upper radiator hose here. I like to just grab them and squeeze them. If they have a mushy texture to them, or you can see cracks developing, it's time to replace these radiator hoses. And you also have hoses that go into your heater core that warm your cabin. These also should be a little squeeze check on them. Make sure they're not cracked. There's no signs of cracks on them. These all look pretty good, and the radiator hose still looks pretty good. We're going to check our brake fluid from the brake fluid reservoir. That's usually a cap. A lot of times will be a yellow cap. And these are kind of see-through reservoirs. So there's kind of a min-max line. This is the max line right here. They don't want you to overfill it. This one, if you can see, is right about here. I'd say we're fine. You could probably add just a hair, but it's fine. And you can take the cap off just to look in there, and you can see that the fluid's right up to near the top of the reservoir. This one here, this is your power steering reservoir. Some of these will have a dipstick, just like on your oil fill. This one doesn't have a dipstick, but it does have a sight glass line. And you can see there's like a min-max level. Now this fluid is cold, so this doesn't bother me that it's down just a little, because as the power steering starts working, this fluid's going to heat up and it'll be up near the top. So I don't see any problem with this fluid. Let's see if it says on this dipstick. If it says hot idling. Okay, one of the last checks we want to make here is the transmission fluid. Most vehicles will want you to run that vehicle, get it warm, and check it either in park or neutral. But it has to be a hot transmission fluid. So this is the one check you're also doing when the vehicle's actually running. So we're going to take a look at this. Wipe it off, reinsert it. And if you notice on this one, we're right on almost to the point we could probably add half a quart. We're still in between the two dots, but we're getting right on the edge there. So I wouldn't have a problem adding maybe half a quart to this transmission, assuming it's fully warmed up. Because they want it in the crosshatch, and we're just barely touching the crosshatch. So we could add probably half a quart. All right, one of the biggest checks, I left it for last, was your battery cables. One thing is, are they tight? Because if you can wiggle them, you need to tighten those cables or replace the ends. Both of them should be tight, and you don't want any buildup of any type of chemicals on these cables. That's probably the biggest thing that leads into no starts, especially when the cold weather hits. So make sure they're tight and there's no buildup of debris. If there is, remove them. Take a little bit of sandpaper, clean all that off, and then put them back on there.
In this video, we have discussed general procedures for monitoring some of the major systems of your vehicle. These checks should be done in a regular interval and before any trips you may consider to be longer than you would normally take. Your owner's manual, commonly found in the glove compartment, can give you specific information about your vehicle. Remember, any other information that you may need could be found with a little patience in your favorite web browser.